There's a stat floating around right now about New Orleans Saints wide receiver Michael Thomas that you're simply not going to believe. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentials member of the media. Of course, you can find me every single day over at USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday, and some more on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at BetOnline. They've got more odds, lines, and props than ever before. Go check them out, BetOnline, where the game starts. There's some big questions around the New Orleans Saints, and one of which that I don't feel like we've gotten into much is how many quarterbacks the New Orleans Saints should keep on their roster. We're going to get to that conversation in a little while. But I want to open up today's show with a stat you're simply not going to believe when it comes to wide receiver Michael Thomas. Right now, and this was put out by CBS, NFL on CBS, they put out a statistic about how many career games any given wide receiver has had with 10 or more receptions. At the top of that list are some familiar names: Antonio Brown with 23, Andre Johnson with 22, Devontae Adams, Julio Jones, Brandon Marshall, all tied at 19. And then you got Michael Thomas and Wes Welker tied at 18. So that puts Michael Thomas just 5 games off of the NFL's sort of leader, active or inactive, when it comes to 10-plus reception games, so 10 or more receptions. The next kind of really interesting and impressive part about this is that if you take Michael Thomas out of the equation, the fewest amount of games played by any of those other wide receivers named on this list are 116 by Devontae Adams. So it took Devontae Adams 116 career games to have 19 in which he had 10 or more catches. As for the leader, Antonio Brown, it took 146 games to get 23. Julio Jones, 145 games to get 119. Then you start getting up to like 175, 179, and 193. When it comes to the other guys, including Andre Johnson, who's second on the list with 22 games of 10 or more receptions. Michael Thomas is only 5 games off of the lead in this conversation and has played only 70 games. 7-0. That is 46 games less or fewer than the next least games played on this list at 116 by Devontae Adams. Antonio Brown, who leads the list with 23, has played twice as many career games as Michael Thomas, and Michael Thomas is only 5 games off of the lead. That's incredible. These are the reasons why you should be excited about Michael Thomas not only being back at practice, but participating in team drills, as we saw him do on Saturday for the first time, making catches, getting into those battles and one-on-ones. Hell, even watching him, get a pass knocked away by Paulson and Debo downfield, or seeing him fumble a ball at one point that was recovered by Tyrann Mathieu. Just the fact that he's out there at all is, first of all, remarkable. But secondly, you can see the value in terms of the efficiency with which he produces when he's on the field in this New Orleans Saints offense. Now, you only get 18 games of 10-plus receptions over the course of 70 in your career if you're the only option on offense for about a season. And that was certainly the case for him back in 2019, in particular, when he broke that record with 149 receptions. I think he averaged just over 8 or 9 catches per game with that. 16 games, 149 catches, right around there. But to see this, that's remarkable. In terms of that consistent production and just the weight of production that he's able to put out on the field. And the great news is that Michael Thomas, if he gets maybe 1 or 2 10 plus catch games in 2022, that's great. That's awesome. Like if he just goes off for a couple of games, that's fine. But with all of the other receiving options, all the other options on offense now, the depth of the offense as it changes where it's not playing so close to the line of scrimmage, it is playing further downfield. He's not going to be asked to do that much anymore, right? And so I think that just goes to show you how the offense is evolving, sort of where this team is versus where it was in terms of its passing offense and all of that. But just to know that if you needed to get a 10 reception game out of Michael Thomas, that you can basically bank on it if you needed to, is a pretty relaxing feeling, I'm sure, for any offensive coordinator or head coach or any quarterback that's out there. And this is one of the reasons why I think getting Michael Thomas is so important, not just for the team and the offense and the passing game as a whole, but for Jameis Winston in particular. To have that level of receiver, that level of reliability, of consistency, sort of that model of trust that you can have in your number one wide receiver with Michael Thomas, who can do something like that, like produce at that level in 46 fewer games than the guys in front of him or more. That helps you when you're a quarterback, right? Like you can always look to go to Michael Thomas right away, right? That quick passing game becomes a big part of what you can now deploy for your offense and that you can now champion for your offense if you're Jameis Winston. Put you in a position to where if you need to make a tough throw, Michael Thomas, if he's got a step, half a step, he's open, right? Being able to take advantage of that. Drew Brees used to talk about that all the time, right? When it comes to Mike, if he's got a step, he's open. If he's got an inch, he's open. And now Jameis Winston sort of gets to take advantage of that, right? We look at the sub 60% completion percentage that Jameis Winston had last year. You think about all the drops, everything around him in 2021, those kind of go away in 2022 with guys like Jarvis Landry and Chris Olave, who also have very solid and trustworthy hands. Plus, of course, Michael Thomas, who averages usually over 70% when it comes to his catch percentage. And then you have him who you can go to as a volume target and still produce in a game. So if one of your other guys isn't producing that day, or if the game plan is built to take away those other guys and make you rely on Michael Thomas, that's probably not the greatest game plan for that opposing defense, but you're going to be able to counteract that because you can rely on Michael Thomas. Michael Thomas has proven time and time again that even if you expect what he's going to do, you still can't stop him from doing it. That's one of the reasons why I get so frustrated around the idea of like the slant boy, quote unquote, conversation, which was all bred from a false report anyway. But the idea that, oh, well, all he does is run slants. Okay, then stop him. And if you can't do that, and instead he's racking up 18, 10 plus catch games over the course of his career in only 70 career games, then whose problem is that really? Because it ain't Michael Thomas's. It ain't going to be Dennis Allen's. It ain't going to be Pete Carmichael's. And it sure ain't going to be Jameis Winston's. It's going to be that opposing defense. It's going to be your best friend who's not a Saints fan's favorite team's opposing defense. It's their problem now. It's not Michael Thomas's. So if you're going to have this guy in Michael Thomas come back and be what Ian Rappaport called full go on NFL Network earlier on Saturday after he returned to team drills on Saturday, which again, don't be surprised if he gets throttled down every now and then, stuff like that, right? Like that's all part of that. You're still going to get veteran rest for guys like this, right? But if you're able to do that and you're in a situation now to where that guy's full go, how much does that just change the complexion of not only your offense or your passing offense, but your team going into 2022? I have never been more certain, and I was pretty certain before, but I am more certain now that the New Orleans Saints are a 10-plus win team in 2022. And Michael Thomas is absolutely a huge part of that. But what an incredible, incredible level of production from the all-pro New Orleans Saints wide receiver. Coming up next, when we talk about who's throwing those passes, we know it's Jameis Winston, but what about the guys behind him? Could the New Orleans Saints actually end up keeping just 2 quarterbacks this year instead of what they usually do, which is keep 3? I'll tell you why it makes sense as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Dave. Every now and then, it's always great to have something to fall back on in case you need a little bit of help. And that's one of the reasons why Dave is here. It can be hard to admit sometimes when you need that little bit of help, but with Dave, it makes it nice and simple. See, Dave is an online banking app that will allow you to get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. So that's, I don't know, a little bit extra money to fill your tank, a little bit extra money to buy groceries for the next couple of weeks, a little bit of extra money for your bills, all of that. It's just going to allow you to finally be able to take care of all of those expenses that have been stressing you out, but without any of the hangups, because there's no interest, there's no credit check required when it comes to Dave. And millions of people have already downloaded and are using the Dave app to get that financial relief that they need with extra cash. So go and download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's DAVE. Sign up for your extra cash account so that you can get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees do apply. Banking is provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Go and check them out. Dave is the app you're looking for. Future you will thank you. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. A little bit of a light Saturday night, Sunday for you, but we'll have another episode on Sunday evening to get you ready for Monday morning when the Saints are back at practice. Remember, Sunday is off for them. The next episode that we have will be kind of a week 2 recap and what we're looking forward to going into week 3. Hoping to have a guest come and join me for that one as well. So keep an eye out for that Sunday night, Monday morning. But here on this Saturday night / Sunday morning, whenever you're watching or listening to us, I have a little bit of a question when I think about projecting the 53-man roster, and a big part of that is how many quarterbacks will the New Orleans Saints keep? Oftentimes, the Saints will keep 3 quarterbacks, Teddy Bridgewater, Drew Brees, Taysom Hill, Jameis Winston, Taysom Hill, Drew Brees, all that. And that's what we've seen sort of in the past, but I've been curious about how much of that has to do with knowing that Taysom Hill is going to play multiple roles and things like that. Could it be that the New Orleans Saints only go with 2 quarterbacks this year? And there's a reason why that would make sense. First of all, your backup is Andy Dalton, right? Your backup is Andy Dalton. So that gives you an opportunity there who I talked about him in a couple of episodes ago, that Andy Dalton is kind of that tier 1 of backup quarterbacks, along with guys like Teddy Bridgewater and Jacoby Brissett, and maybe some of the new rookies in the NFL, like the Falcons have a pretty cushy setup in that there's a guy that they really like in Desmond Ridder, who's technically their backup. So it's a good situation for them, even though it's not, I don't know how much it's going to move the needle for them, but it's a good situation for them. Malik Willis is coming along in Tennessee, right? And could he be, in that tier of excellent backups before he becomes a starter or until he becomes a starter? Like, you could put the rookies in those conversations as well. But in terms of the NFL veterans that are now backups, that's kind of your 3: Brissett, Bridgewater, Dalton. And you've got Dalton in New Orleans now, who not only is somebody that you're able to rely on if Jameis has to go off the field to tie his shoe at some point, but he's also somebody that you can rely on the sideline that can kind of be that extra coach on the sideline. Hey, here's what I saw during that series. Here's what I'm seeing in terms of how the safety's playing that. So maybe X, Y, and Z, right? Like, they can have some of those conversations that Jameis has already shown you he has a propensity for himself, but then to be able to go to the sideline and go to somebody that also has his own acuity when it comes to breaking down the defense, then that really, really helps as well, while that defense is on the field trying to get the ball back to the offense. So that's great news that you have an Andy Dalton like that, because that makes such a big difference for you. But does it make the Saints comfortable enough knowing that they've got Andy Dalton and knowing that they also have Taysom Hill taking up a roster spot in the tight end room effectively? Does that make them comfortable enough that maybe they don't have Ian Book on the active roster, and instead after the preseason, they'd have to cut him, so you have to hope that he makes it through waivers and stuff like that, but we generally see players make it through waivers. So you'd have to cut him, but then get him back on the practice squad so you have somebody as sort of this emergency quarterback, knowing you already have an emergency quarterback on the roster in Taysom Hill. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that all of a sudden you're letting Taysom Hill recompete for the quarterback spot or anything like that. You're instead in a situation to where, kind of like with Alvin Kamara in the past, who has been the New Orleans Saints emergency quarterback over the course of the past few seasons, to where if all of a sudden you're out of quarterbacks, then you go to your emergency guy who's probably coming over from another position. Think that terrible Denver Broncos game years ago when Kendall Hinton moved over to quarterback, right? And they almost sent out an assistant coach, but the unions wouldn't allow them to do that, of course. So because of that, does it make sense to just have Winston and Dalton, and then you've just got Taysom Hill readily available should you need an emergency quarterback at any point? And then, of course, because Ian Book is on your practice squad, You can always elevate him if you need to, things like that. But what's the benefit of doing that? And the benefit of doing that is that you open up a roster spot to use somewhere else. Maybe you want to keep an additional wide receiver because a guy like Kirk Merritt is leaving you no choice but to get him on the roster. Or a guy like Dejon Dixon is leaving you no choice but to get him on the roster. Maybe it's leaving a spot for another defensive back because a guy like Quentin Meeks really impresses over the course of camp. Or you want to keep an extra safety because you've got, Daniel Sorensen, who's probably going to make the roster as a special teamer, but you also want to keep somebody that's viable on defense behind Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May, JT Gray, and PJ Williams, and you really want Justin Evans on the roster, then you can make the room to do that by having only 2 quarterbacks as opposed to 3. So I think that's where you end up with the advantage of keeping just 2 quarterbacks, that you open up another spot in that defensive back room at that wide receiver position in the trenches on the offensive or defensive side. It gives you that extra roster spot and that extra versatility. And if you think about it, and if you kind of play this correctly, you're really giving the extra spot maybe just to the tight end room so that you keep 4 tight ends, because then you've got a quarterback and a tight end taking up that roster spot in Taysom Hill, right? Emergency quarterback and tight end taking up a roster spot in Taysom Hill. And so really what you're trying to do is say, okay, don't need that roster spot at quarterback anymore, so fill that roster spot with a player that serves multiple roles. That's why Justin Evans would make sense, for instance, or another wide receiver that is also a special teamer and that's able to contribute to you as a jammer and as a gunner and potentially as a returner like a Kirk Merritt could, or like an Jameis Winston could. So that's sort of the advantage of keeping just the 2 quarterbacks as opposed to the usual for the Saints 3 quarterbacks. Across the NFL, it's a little bit more standard to just keep 2 quarterbacks, and you usually have one on the practice squad, and then you have an emergency quarterback designated somewhere else. So this wouldn't be unusual in terms of the NFL landscape. It would just be a little bit unusual because of the New Orleans Saints landscape. Are you concerned, though, about only having 2 quarterbacks because you have Jameis Winston coming off of an ACL tear and a little bit of an aging quarterback in Andy Dalton? So does that give you pause a little bit? I don't know, because you've got Taysom Hill. And by the way, I've seen people suggest a little bit that Taysom Hill's not on the field because he wants to play quarterback and they're not letting him play quarterback. That could not be further from the truth. That is absolutely incorrect. Taysom Hill is off the field because he's injured and he's working his way back. I see him every day at practice. He's just not practicing because he's doing the side work. He's working with the medical staff. He's working to get himself back out on the field. He came off the field his first day of practice, like training camp day 1, and went into the tight end room. And according to Adam Troutman, basically said, wow, that was really fun being out there and playing that role. And he apparently had the time of his life doing that. So I don't know where this whole idea came about that Taysom Hill is kind of like holding in because he's not playing quarterback, but like, don't pay attention to that. That couldn't be further from the truth. But it'd be interesting. I think the Saints maybe only keep 2 quarterbacks this year because of the value that Taysom Hill brings you as an emergency quarterback while taking up a roster spot in a different room. And then you get to maximize that other spot somewhere else to open up another opportunity with another very multiple player elsewhere on the roster. So we'll see how it goes. But I think the Saints would be warranted in going that direction. Coming up next, who's going to be the starter next to David Onyemata? This is a big question. It was one that we were going to be watching big time going into camp. And it could be a defensive tackle, but what if it's just simply defensive tackles, plural? We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline, our exclusive online betting partners and your number one source for all of your sports wagering information, all your sports wagering podcasts, articles, everything that you need. They've got it for you over at BetOnline, including more odds, lines, and props than ever before, including odds, lines, and props on your New Orleans Saints, player props for Chris Olave's rookie season, or if you're interested in what's going on around the NFL, you can bet on quarterback battles. Right now, there's a bunch of stuff for you to check out. That's just the NFL. They also have the NBA, MLB, NHL, college football, which is on the way. You've got combat sports, you've got esports, you've got horse racing, golf. There's so much for you to get in on. You can check up and keep up with all of the trends and action over at BetOnline, which you can check out on your mobile device or your desktop or laptop. Go and see them today. BetOnline, where the game starts. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with your questions from the live show earlier today. I want to kick us off with probably one of my favorite topics that I've been tracking all throughout training camp so far. It's the defensive interior. Let's get to the trenches, the big uglies, the big guys. This question comes from Future Trunks, which again, I think is my favorite DBZ character. Future Trunks asks, who do you think will be the starter next to David Onyemata? I don't know that that answer is as simple as I expected it to be, especially after hearing what Ryan Nielsen had to say in his post-practice presser with us today when he was talking to Luke Johnson of NOLA.com and said that there hasn't been a defensive line depth chart in the locker room since in the defensive line room since he has been the defensive line coach, which would stretch back to 2017. So I think that what's really most important is like, what is the rotation next to David Onyemata? What is the rotation with David Onyemata? And who are those players? So Shai Tuttle is absolutely up there. Malcolm Roach can be up there. Albert Huggins should be in there because he's a guy that can play kind of nose tackle for you too. He can kind of relieve David Onyemata every now and then as well. But the big name that I've been watching so far this camp on the interior, outside of Jordan Jackson, who is the young rookie, who's had some like flash moments, but just is still, he's got the rookie leap to make, right? So the big guy that I've been watching though is Kentavius Street, who has NFL experience, has experience playing in the Superdome, and that just has sort of this unique brand of defensive tackle that I think is really interesting to watch. And that he can be a power guy, like he can transition speed to power, he can do all of that, but that he's a little bit more of a twitchy, athletic version of a defensive tackle, which could be really nice paired with David Onyemata as like a 3-tech, which remember, that's kind of lining up in the B gap in between the guard and the tackle, a little bit more of your standard pass rusher as opposed to your run stuffer. Now, he can serve both roles, and any defensive tackle in the NFL needs to be asked to serve both roles. But there was another comment that was made by one of the defensive linemen the other day that I thought was really interesting about how the New Orleans Saints actually play the run first, and that some defenses around the NFL don't usually do that. And basically the way that the New Orleans Saints mentality is that if the defensive line plays the run first, takes away the run, then it gives them an opportunity to pass rush. Because if they take away the run, then the quarterback has to drop back to pass, right? And so if you're forcing that team to throw the ball as opposed to run, then you get the opportunity to pin your ears back, have fun, and get after the quarterback. But you have to take away the run first. You have to neutralize the run game, make that team rely on their passing game, and then get those opportunities. So the idea here being fewer run attempts means more pass attempts. More pass attempts means more opportunities for sacks. That's simple, right? Or disruption in the passing game that leads to turnovers or whatever, right? So all of those pieces all kind of come into mind. And when you think about that, what you really need from the very beginning to end of a game is fresh legs. You need fresh legs that are going to go in and that are going to be able to be impactful 10 plays into a drive, that are going to be impactful in situational downs like 3rd and 4th down or in the red zone or whatever. And you're going to need players that can be impactful for you all the way down into the 4th quarter. So almost more important than who the starter is next to David Onyemata is how the rotation looks. I'll be curious, though, if that starter is going to be Shai Tuttle or if maybe Kentavius Street ends up jumping in there because of sort of that brand of ball that he brings that's unique. And his ability in the run game helps him out quite a bit there, too. So right now, I'd probably say Shai Tuttle, but I'm watching Kentavius Street to do that. Now, I'll be honest, too, like Shai Tuttle is kind of taking some like 2nd and 3rd team snaps while some of these other guys are getting up there in terms of the 1st team snaps. So we'll see how that all translates once it actually comes to game time. We got to go to JLD Hot Sauce here. Love this. What's going on, family? Mr. Jerry. Will Lucas Kroll make the 53? See, now, Mr. Jerry was very nice. He could have written Nick Kroll here, and I probably would have read it. And I probably wouldn't have thought anything about it. Lucas Kroll, will he make the 53? I don't know. My thing about the 53 with this group, Lucas Kroll has had some really nice moments, and I've been a fan of his since camp started, before camp started, and all that. I just think it's special, right? When you're 6'6", 250 pounds, and you move the way that he does. But it's hard with Taysom Hill in that room now because Adam Troutman's going to make the roster. I feel very confident that Juwan Johnson's going to make the roster. There's no reason for him not to. And Taysom Hill's going to make the roster because he's getting paid $10 million a year. So, of course, he's going to make the roster. So, with that being the case, like, do you keep a 4th tight end? And if you do, is it Vannett? Or do you save a little bit of money by moving on from Vannett and going with Lucas Kroll? Or do you not keep the 4th tight end? Or because you kept 2 quarterbacks, do you consider a 4th tight end spot being one that technically keeps a 3rd quarterback on the roster because it's Taysom Hill and therefore allows you to keep Lucas Kroll in the building? So it's a little tough. It depends on how many tight ends they keep. If they only keep 3, then I would say no, and then he becomes a prime elevation option for you from your practice squad. if he does, I mean, if they do keep 4, then I think he legitimately battles with Nick Van Ed to get there. That's the way that I think that it all works out. Let's go to Ian Butler here. Hey, Ross, what do you think first-year head coach will be looking at most during the preseason games? Will it be positions, players in those positions, schemes, etc.? I think it's going to be about players in the system. The thing that's really unique about the New Orleans Saints is that they've always they have their system that is the New Orleans Saints system. And when you show up, you kind of have to buy into it, right? Like you have to buy into the defensive line rotation if you're going to be a defensive lineman. You have to buy into being asked to do multiple roles if you're on the linebacking core or the secondary core. If you're on offense and you're a wide receiver, you have to buy into the idea that you're going to be moved around the line of scrimmage. If you're a running back, you have to buy into the idea that you're going to be split out wide. You're going to line up in the slot. You're going to be motioned out. You're going to run. You have to expand your route tree. You have to be a viable option in the passing game as well as you are in the run game. All of that, right? Like you get it. Like everybody has to kind of buy into what the New Orleans Saints system is. However, the thing that the New Orleans Saints have done so well throughout Sean Payton's tenure and what they've continued to do here with Dennis Allen, Ryan Nielsen, and Chris Richard, as well as Pete Carmichael in terms of the coordinators defensively and offensively, respectively, is fine-tune the system a little bit, like nuance the system a little bit to heighten and put players in position to be most successful with what they're best at. So I think you're looking at the players in the scheme, in the system, to make sure that the system is still serving its purpose, but that you're fine-tuning it to match the players who are operating in that system. And if you are a player that gives the coaches a reason and is like, we should be doing this with that player, and you give them a reason to elevate what it is that you're doing or change what it is that you're doing, there's a freedom to do that within the system, and we've seen that, of course, in the past. All right, let's get to LGO. I said your team every day. What's going on? Appreciate that. Any update on Smoke and then moving him to injured reserve? Does that mean that he's staying with the team? And what about a Rashid Shaheed update? So for the past couple of days, we've seen Rashid Shaheed, who is the wide receiver return specialist out of Weber State, which is up in Utah, get side work off to the side. And the last time we saw him really do it, he worked extensively for a long time and worked in full pads with his helmet and everything. So I think he's getting closer. And I'm really excited to see what he brings because his speed is undeniable and his return ability is insane. So I'm really interested to see what the New Orleans Saints get with him. The fact that they've been working with him to get him back for 2 weeks now means that they see something in him and that they're not just going to move on from him with some kind of like injury designation or something like that. Like clearly they like something about him. So I want to see what that is. When it comes to Smoke Monday, him being moved to injured reserve means that basically his season's over at this point, but he will get to rehab with the team and he should get another opportunity with the team next offseason. So he won't go anywhere. He'll be on injured reserve with the Saints all season. He'll get his opportunity to rehab with the team and all that. And hopefully he gets that next shot again next year. And then finally, let's go to Jamal Dabney, who said, Ross, can you do a quick update on Pete? No one else is talking about him. Jamal, that's good news that no one else is talking about him. Because the fact of the matter is that when it comes to the offensive line, for the most part, like no news is good news. So here's what I'll tell you. Andres Pete, Cesar Ruiz, neither of them have looked like obvious weak points on the offensive line so far during camp. And trust me, we've seen obvious weak points in the offensive line because we've watched second and third team reps where there have been some struggles, particularly third team, right? So like we've seen some of those struggles. But for Pete, for Ruiz, I'll just put them both in this conversation for you. They've actually been holding pretty steady. Now we have to see them in full game action. We have to see it all translate full speed out on the field, all that. Again, we've only got 4 padded practices and stuff. So take this as like an early assessment that still has a lot of opportunity to ebb, flow, change, and all that. The way that I'll say it for you when it comes to Andres Pete is, so far, nothing of grave concern. And so far, nothing to write home about either, right? Like you're going to remain, when it comes to the trenches here, offensive and defensive line, you're going to remain kind of diligently cautious, but cautiously optimistic around where both sides of the line are in New Orleans right now. All right, y'all, coming up tomorrow, it's going to be our week 2 wrap up and our week 3 look ahead. Michael Thomas, Tyrann Mathieu bringing you a ton of excitement, but how soon do we see CJ Gardner-Johnson and Marshawn Lattimore back? And what else are we looking for going into week 3, especially with the preseason game at the end of that week? And how will that all set up what we're going to see next Saturday night, the 13th at NRG Stadium in Houston? We've got all that coming up for you in another episode tomorrow night, Sunday night, going into Monday morning. I appreciate you as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Make sure to go and check out that Locked On NFL podcast as your second listen today as well to get all the information around the NFL in less than 30 minutes. I appreciate you as always for making Locked On Saints and me a part of your day, a part of your routine. Let me give a quick shout out to Sweet Pea and Booza, Tommy and Paula. Really, really excited that I got the opportunity to meet y'all at training camp. Dominic as well, and everybody else that has taken the time to say hello at Saints training camp. For everything else that you need around your New Orleans Saints, make sure that you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.